Welcome to a new segment of Expert Insights hosted by the IPS. Today we are privileged to have Mehvesh Ahmed, Director of Research at the Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society. CAPS and IPS has been doing research on the regulatory framework for social development organizations or NGOs in Sri Lanka as well as other Asian economies. And the Doing Good Index is what is the outcome of this. Mehvesh, what exactly is the Doing Good Index?
So the Doing Good Index is an effort to map the landscape for the enabling environment for philanthropic and charitable giving and receiving across Asia. And we focus on the regulatory regimes under which the social sector operates, the tax and fiscal incentives for both the giving of money and the receiving, as well as the ecosystem, which is how well society embraces and supports the social sector, and finally procurement, which would be government procurement of social services from this sector. And we have three main findings which I can share with you. One is that we find that across Asia, almost all economies actually do well in the ecosystem sub-index relative to the others, which means that societies are ready, they are embracing giving, they are participating as volunteers, corporations are engaging with the social sector, awards are being offered in the sector, universities are offering courses on non-profits. So societies are engaged and in fact are ahead of government because the ecosystem score is higher across the board than the other sub-indexes, including regulations and tax and fiscal. So that's one main finding. The other main finding is that tax and fiscal incentives in Asia have both an actual and a signaling effect. So in Asia, philanthropists and corporations and other institutions tend to work in tandem with government. So when the government is setting, for example, a 100% tax deduction, not only will that have an actual effect on the resources that would be diverted from the private sector to the social sector, but also it will have an amplified effect because organizations and institutions recognize that the government wants us to give. So that's the second. And the third one is that the sheer resources that can be unleashed in Asia, were the right policies in place, are very consequential. So if Asians were to donate up to 2% of GDP towards the social sector, that would unleash $507 billion a year, which, to put it in perspective, is 11 times the foreign aid that flows to the 15 economies that we cover. And it is a third of the annual global cost of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're talking about a big, very consequential shift in meeting societal needs across Asia.
Mehvesh, as you said, this study looks at 15 different Asian economies. Where does Sri Lanka stand in terms of compared to other Asian economies?
So the economies that we look at cluster into four groups. And you can think of these four groups as having different distances to travel to achieving a truly nurtured and supported social sector. And Sri Lanka falls in the second group. So we have economies that are doing well, that include Singapore, Taiwan, and Japan. Then we have economies that are doing better, that include Sri Lanka and a lot of Southeast Asian economies, as well as Hong Kong and Korea. China, India, and Pakistan are in the third group, which are doing okay. And the countries that are not doing enough are Indonesia and Myanmar. So Sri Lanka is doing reasonably well, but not yet well enough.
In terms of what Sri Lanka can improve or what its weaknesses are, as well as where it's doing better, what are some of the specific areas in Sri Lanka in terms of the STO sector that we can do better?
So Sri Lanka does fairly well in ease of establishment and operations for social delivery organizations. It checks the boxes when it comes to decent engagement between different stakeholders in society. What it can improve in, though, are tax and fiscal incentives. Although Sri Lanka offers a 100% tax deduction for individual and corporate donations, these deductions are only available for donating to a rather small group of organizations. So that's one. Also, the income that is eligible for these deductions is limited to about 33% for individuals. So there's some distance to travel here. Another area that Sri Lanka can improve in is performance on the index of ecosystem. So unlike the rest of Asia, in Sri Lanka we actually find that the sub-index, the ecosystem sub-index score is lower than the sub-index scores for Sri Lanka for regulations, tax and fiscal policy, and procurement. And what that tells us is there are gaps to be filled yet in terms of societal engagement with Sri Lanka. One of those would be the way that corporations engage with the social sector, either through CSR programs, volunteering, or serving on non-profit boards. We find that although most Sri Lankan social delivery organizations have boards, and a lot of them have corporate representation on their boards, they find it very difficult to recruit from the corporate sector. And also in our sample, in our survey, we found that less than a quarter of organizations are actively engaged with the corporate sector and soliciting volunteers through company volunteering programs. So that's one gap. Universities yet are not offering enough courses on nonprofits, which affects the pipeline of future human resources and human capital for this sector.
Finally, Mehvesh, in terms of the Doing Good Index moving forward, what do you envision it to be in the future, and how do you see it tapping into the SDO sector in Sri Lanka?
So we intend to repeat the Doing Good Index every 2 years, and the hope is that all the stakeholders, government, the SDO sector, the corporate sector, individual donors, can look at this as a source of credible, evidence-driven analysis of what are the levers that can encourage giving and what are the levers that can hinder giving. So what the social sector can do is use the index to track and trace that, but also use the index to really identify the gaps, and also use the data that other countries have provided to both learn from them and give lessons to them in filling gaps in those other countries. So there's a lot of information sharing and best practice sharing that can occur through the Doing Good Index.
Okay, thank you very much, Mehvesh, and thank you very much for your time and coming to IPS as well.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.